wasn't even going to do a June wrap up because I thought I didn't read anything. Turns out I read 6 books. June was such a fever dream. I have no idea what happened in that month, but I know it felt like it went on forever, and I am so happy that it's finally over. Like I said, I finished 6 books this month, and it was actually a pretty good month. I was having a few months there where it seemed like every book I was picking up just wasn't scratching the itch that I needed it to. If anything, the books were making the itch even worse. So I am very happy with June, even though I don't remember much of June. For the third time, I finished 6 books this month, but I only have a physical copy of 2 of them. So let's go over the other ones first, and then we'll get into these 2 because I think I have the most to say about these 2. We really need to talk about them. I got my blanket and I am ready to discuss these books. The first book that I finished in June was The Risk by St. Abby, or Stabby, and this is the first book within the Mindfuck series. I have a whole video up on my channel of me reading this book. I was so intimidated at first because I went, wow, this is a very long book, and then I found out that the Mindfuck series is really just a collection of all of these shorter stories. And I ended up finding out in that video that each individual book was on Kindle Unlimited, so I read that first book. On Storygraph, I didn't give this a rating just because this was not a book that I was going into with any sort of expectations. It was really just for a fun time, and I had a fun time. Because of this book, I am now trying this new thing where I read at least 1 book a month just for pure enjoyment. Basically, since I've started getting into reading, I quickly became a rather harsh critic. And while I still enjoy being a critic and kind of having my opinions and having these expectations that I want these books I'm spending money on to meet, I also want to have those experiences with books that I'm just there to enjoy. I'm not sitting there thinking about the grammar or the character building, world building, magic system, plot, things like that. I want to be able to go in every once in a while for vibes and vibes only, and I like to thank this book for giving me that thought, that idea, because while this book wasn't anything spectacular, it was fun. I had a fun time, and that was so nice. I said in my review, not a single thought was in my head other than, nice. She killed another one. The next book that I ended up finishing was actually an audiobook, and it is Impact Winter Season 2. This is also free on Audible. I loved free things this month, apparently. Just like with Season 1, I really enjoyed the production and the cast of characters, but they still had the same issue where there was just something missing in the storyline. And it's not like it's a plot hole or anything, it's just there's an element missing from both Season 1 and Season 2. With that being said, I really enjoyed my time with it. It was free. I'm going to probably listen to Season 3 when it comes out. I think I've just kind of learned with these Audible originals to not expect a lot from the storyline, but just enjoy my time with it and the production, like I said. In June, I also read Sharp Objects, which was my first ever mystery thriller book. I am not someone who ever thought that they would be picking up willingly a mystery thriller, but here I was, along with trying to also read a book every month just for pure enjoyment. I'm also trying to broaden my horizons, expand my palette. I primarily read fantasy and science fiction, but what I've kind of noticed is just like an oversaturation, if that's the right word. I don't know if I'm using that correctly. It just felt like reading a lot of the same genre was kind of dimming the light and the spark and sparkle on all of the other books that I read in that genre afterwards. Don't get me wrong, I absolutely love fantasy, but I kind of wanted to break it up a little bit with other things. So I ended up picking up Sharp Objects, which, like I said, is a mystery thriller. I don't know how I found this. I think maybe probably on TikTok, and I had just seen enough people speak about it saying that they enjoyed it, so I went, sounds good to me. I was really nervous because people were telling me that they were scared when reading this, and I wasn't scared, which is weird because I get scared so easily. Why'd we stop typing? Oh, I don't like it, I don't like it, I don't like it, I don't like it. I thought it was just text messages and photos, and now we have a stupid little voice note from Steve, but we had a phone call and I didn't like the noise it made. I didn't look, but I didn't like the noise it made. I did not like that. So I don't know if maybe I just wasn't investing enough, or if maybe I missed something, or my imagination isn't great or super vivid when reading, but I wasn't scared. I think maybe because I was a little put off by some things that I thought were unnecessary in the story, maybe that just kind of like dulled the scary aspects. I was kind of like, hey, did we need this in here? It wasn't a bad book by any means, and like I said, it was my first ever mystery thriller, so I don't really know what to expect, like what sets a good one apart from a bad one. But for me, I'm gonna be placing this like in the mid-range. I do know that there is a Hulu show, so maybe I'll watch the Hulu show, though that's kind of scary because at least with a book there's no like music or sound effects to make me more scared or jump scares. I don't know if there'd be any jump scares in the Hulu show, but they might show me things that I don't want to see. I don't know. That sounds a lot more terrifying than reading words on a page. But yeah, other than the fact that I just wasn't really scared by it, I enjoyed my time with it. I mean, I finished it, so that says something. The Lies of the Ajungo. This is a novella. I think it's about like 80 pages long. I found this on TikTok. One of my mutuals had talked about it once, and I immediately screenshotted it and added it to my TBR. And I was going to wait to like buy it and then read it physical form, but I was really insane last month. I think I was rotating through a bunch of books and I ended up picking up The Lies of the Ajungo. Like I said, it's only 80 pages long, and I do love a novella. I think it's a really nice like palate cleanser. You don't have to commit to too much, right? It's only 80 pages. And ever since I read The Empress of Salt and Fortune, I have been trying to find other novellas that do so much within the small amount of pages. And The Lies of the Ajungo, I am so happy to say, did just that. It was insane to me how much was fit into 80 fucking pages. The characters were developed. There was this whole world established and built for me, and history and backstory, and a pretty solid plot line. Like, I was baffled when I finished it. I gave this 4 stars because it was just, it definitely had its issues. It wasn't without its faults by any means, but again, I want to remind you that this was only 80 pages long. It was just so impressive to me how much this author was able to fit into 80 pages. So if you're looking for a novella, a fantasy novella, I highly suggest The Lies of the Ajungo. Give it a shot, and then we can talk about it. All right, now we are down to the last 2 books, which are the ones that I have physical copies of. So let's start with The Hero of Ages. This is the 3rd book within the Mistborn series, which is also the final book in Mistborn Era 1. I cried at the end of this book, which is just so insane. Every time I cry while reading is insane. I think I've cried twice, like full tears. Like there was a tear that went down my face. I don't want to spoil anything, so I'm going to try to talk about this without spoiling. I have a list of characters that I really care about. List of characters that I was mentally threatening Brandon Sanderson if he were to do any harm to them. And he did harm to a lot of them. He did leave one alone, allegedly. I don't know. That's up for debate. But yeah, he did a few of them dirty, and it really hurt my feelings. But God, what an amazing ending to a trilogy. I completely understand why so many people rave about Mistborn, and why they also say that this is a really good place to start with his work, because I think it is. Okay, I'm gonna be honest, Ashfell was said a lot in this book. It was driving me insane. But the overall story, the writing, the characters, the world, the magic system, I loved this so much. And I think if I had not been such a scaredy cat and had picked this up sooner, like when I had first bought it 2 years ago, I think I would have loved it even more, because it would have really, really ignited my love for fantasy. I actually found this series because one time I went onto TikTok and I looked up books like Harry Potter, and the first book had, well, kind of similar to this. It had the castle on there, and I went, hey, that looks like Hogwarts. And then people just said like, hey, it's not the same, but I think you would like this. And I completely understand why they suggested this series. It was kind of like reading Harry Potter for the first time in a way, but just as an adult. There were characters that I grew to really love and care for and want to see really good things happen for them, and not all of them got that. There was a magic system that was just so fresh for me, and that's kind of hard to do nowadays, especially after reading so much fantasy. The interpersonal relationships I loved, and they were very believable. Like, all of these characters felt very real to me, even though a lot of them had abilities that make them not human or real in our world, but they just felt so realistic and genuine, and I loved the world. Like, I could picture the world, and for me, I don't have a great picture. Like, I can't see super vivid imagery most of the time when I'm reading, but I think Brandon just approached world building and setting a scene for you in such like a simplistic but also masterful way, where I was able to see it all. And I was also never once confused as to what I was supposed to be seeing or feeling, and I loved that. But yeah, I loved Mistborn, and I think what's next for me is The Way of Kings, which is terrifying. Though I could probably read Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. I think the next thing I read by Brandon Sanderson is going to be Yumi and the Nightmare Painter, and then I'll go into The Way of Kings. I'm also thinking about, when I do finally get to The Way of Kings, vlogging and like giving you my updates and like my journey through that, because I feel like people really like to see others read The Way of Kings for the first time. I don't know, let me know. And then lastly, we have The Sword of Kaigen. This was my book club's book pick for June, and I did manage to finish this in June. I finished it on the last day of June with an hour left in the day, but I still finished it in time. This was a very good book. I understand why people love it so much. Is it really slow in the beginning? Yeah, it's slow for a long while, but once it picked up and once I really committed to reading this story and giving it my attention, I was quickly in love. I think this author did such an amazing job with all of these characters and with the world. Just everything, all of those things. It was so, so well done. I'm honestly in awe of how this author did this. I did, however, only give it 4 stars, and I honestly think, along with like the few things that I found that were like issues throughout the story, the ending kind of had an impact on my overall rating. I went into this knowing that the ending kind of felt like a setup for another book, but also knowing that this is a standalone. There is not going to be a follow-up. I knew that going in, and yet when I got to the ending, I was still so frustrated. I both loved and hated the ending. It felt a bit rude, if I'm being honest with how it ended. Like, you're giving me all of this information. You're clearly setting up so much for another story and for me to get answers in another book. Like, I'm invested. I will pay for that next book, but you're not gonna give it to me? Like, it just felt kind of like a slap in the face. I didn't like it, but I also liked it. But I didn't like it. You see where I'm struggling? Like, I liked it, but I didn't. Overall, I am really glad that I finally read this, and someone had once told me that this is definitely one of those books where it's best to sit down and read it in as few sessions as possible, and I definitely agree with that. In the beginning, when it was slow, I was breaking it up, and that just made it seem even more slow. But then once I committed, I was listening to as much as I could in each session. I think I managed to finish like this amount of it in like 3 or 4 sessions. It was definitely best done that way, in my opinion. Overall, June was a pretty good month for me. I had 3 books that were 4 stars or higher, which I don't think I've had in a very long time. I think a majority of the books that I've read so far have all been within like the 3-star range, which isn't necessarily bad, but it doesn't make me super excited to talk about them. Whereas having 3 books, so that's 50% of the books that I read in June, were 4 stars or higher. That's pretty good. I'm kind of hungry, so I think I'm gonna end this video now and go eat some food. See you next time.